Hello, my name is Elena Nichifor. I'm a probation officer at the Brașov Probation Service in Romania. It is a county probation service where I've been working since 2007. I am a part of a relatively large team of probation officers. We are 26 and we are managing over 1,000 offenders registered per year. This means that we have high caseload of each of us, and the neurodiversity subject impacts each of us also. So, in the next minutes, I will talk about how neurodiversity impacts our daily probation work. There are three main activities in probation: assessment reports, supervision terms, and counseling programs, all following the same purpose: rehabilitation of the person, of the offender. Generally, a neurodiverse offender represents a challenge for us. When we talk about neurodiversity in probation work, we have to think of the offenders with so diverse problems like illiteracy, language disorders, different disorders from autism spectrum, difficulties in understanding a message, epilepsy, ADHD. The most common symptoms we meet during the interaction with the offenders like this are impulsiveness, easily distracted, poor listening skills, concentration problems, nervousness, or severe anxiety, often associated with a low rate of education and substance abuse. I must say that illiteracy is the most frequent aspect we meet in comparison with the others. Usually, very few of these persons have a medical diagnosis. Most of the time, we see those indicators during our interaction with the offender, and that is how we become aware that something is wrong and we start to find out about the problems of the offender. All these particularities impact all probation activities because each of them is possible only by interacting with the offender. I'll take one by one each activity and share with you some of our experience related to neurodiverse offenders. In the assessment activity, the difficulty of working with this type of offenders is reinforced by the first contact, which can be difficult for both sides, offender and probationists. The assessment report, which is needed by the court to pass a definitive sentence, brings together the probation officer and the offender for the first time. The officer usually has some information about the offense, but seldom details about the particularities of the offender. At the same time, it's a stressful situation for all participants, but especially for the offender. And when we talk about neurodiversity, this is a frame in which all normal reactions like being worried, nervous, reluctant, all anxieties amplifies and become more visible. Thus, our client can be more suspicious than usual. He can be more challenging or more tense, or refuses to speak about himself, or refuses to speak about the offense. In general, for an assessment report, one or two meetings are needed with the offender and his family members. These meetings can take place at the probation office, where it's a safe place to work, and or at the offender's home, seldom at the police station. This is possible when at countryside, usually when the home of the offender is hard to be accessed or doesn't meet the requirements for an assessment interview. sometimes in prison if the offender is convicted for another crime or is there because of preventive detention. In a lot of cases, doing an interview at his house, at his home, carries a chance of unpredictability of the offender, which must be taken into account by the probation officer prior to the meeting with the offender, of course. For example, a problematic offender who is on trial for his antisocial behavior and is known for being impulsive is more likely to act differently in his known environment, like his home, than the way he may act in a probation office. For example, we have cases when the offender had a menacing attitude or indirectly threatened to harm the officer who came at his home. For this to avoid a potential conflict, the experience of the probation is to identify and to read the person from the beginning of the meeting and to adapt his intervention to his needs is a must. As such, the probationist adjusts his interaction. The speech must be clear, unambiguous, articulated. He must adapt the non-verbal communication to send a correct message in order to create a safe and comfortable environment favorable for the assessing interview. Also, if it is possible, have a break or assure yourself that the offender in front of you can continue to respond to your questions. Sometimes the presence of a family member or a close person who she or he trusts can be useful also. At the end, you have to adapt the interview to the offender's special needs, but you can only do this if you have the proper knowledge and techniques to apply on. And the last but not least, the experience is an important factor in working with neurodiverse offenders. The second main activity is supervision. During the supervision term, the equation changes. It's a longer interactional time and more personal or social problems of the offender come to surface during the 4 years maximum supervision term. The most common indicators of neurodiversity we meet during supervision term are related to substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, gambling, which is associated with low social adaptation level, difficulty in maintaining a permanent or long relationship, aggressiveness towards family members or towards himself, and very often illiteracy, etc. The rate of illiterate or semi-literate offender is high, as I said earlier. But more often, the offender with a low level of education and a low financial status or social status easily complies with the terms of supervision than an offender with a medium to high level of education but with behavioral problems, for example, due to ADHD syndrome, like impulsiveness, low frustration level, easily distracted, temper outbursts, etc. The last one is more inclined to break the law or break the rules of supervision or is not fulfilling his obligations in time, etc. Another disturbing aspect is that he does not respect the schedule of the meetings, and this is happening more often at the beginning of the supervision term. For example, the supervised person comes to meet the probation officer unannounced, with a demanding attitude, often vocal, disturbing the others around. Also, another specific reaction coming from a problematic offender is his discontent regarding his punishment, the way he is being treated by his probation officer also. Usually, he shows a general dissatisfaction emerging from his attitude. It's very visible. But a different aspect, antagonist to the ones I just explained, is that we have encountered also one reaction related to attachment, and the line to this is time. Working for 2 to 4 years probation term, 4 years being the maximum probation term that can be put in a sentence. With the offender, it's a long period of time, of course, but you may see that gradually the offender with special needs became more confident in you than it was at the first meeting. He became more trustful in your supporting role, your judgment. He became less worried and nervous at the meetings. His aggressiveness attenuates, decreases. But of course, this happens if you try to meet his expectations and have an equilibrated attitude towards him during the whole time. He will see that, and this can be the feedback for you, a positive one. Another main activity is counseling programs for the supervised offenders as part of sentence obligations that he or she must comply with. In the case of an offender with special needs, like a neurodiverse offender, we use individual programs more than group programs because a neurodiverse offender usually doesn't meet the criteria for group programs. It's very difficult to work with those kind of offenders in group programs. During this type of activity, the challenges for the probationists come, as on supervision, from the problems offenders have, like substance abuse, family problems associated with low social integration, financial problems, and so on. In some cases, the offender abandons in the middle of the program, and this may attract for him other legal problems. He may be brought again in front of the judge for not fulfilling his legal obligations. In other cases, he skips counseling meetings or doesn't comply to the schedule. All these are direct and visible reactions, but we can talk about more subtle reactions that we meet during counseling sessions. And they are related to his interaction with the tutor of the program, like pushing boundaries, is more provocative and seeks to victimize himself all the time, is suspicious and resistant to every exercise or every new exercise you propose during the sessions. For example, for a social offender, a new probation activity like a counseling program can be a new playground for him, if I may say so. Instead, an offender who is suffering from epilepsy has other particularities and different kind of needs that we have to take into consideration. In conclusion, it's not easy to work with this type of persons. It requires previous preparation, patience, self-control, empathy, even wisdom. Can be a difficult work but provocative one also. As a probationist, you have to gather all your knowledge and practical skills to adapt to this kind of client whose needs can be very diverse, as I just said. So, as you already understand, we don't have a special procedure to work with in case of neurodiverse offenders. At the present, the difference between a proper approach and an unsatisfying one is made by the experience of the probation officer, his empathy, and his willingness to understand and to work with a different type of offender other than he has been already used to. The cases of neurodiverse offenders are not frequently met in practice, but the challenges that brings forth the probationist are important, and that's why he must be helped with proper working instruments and knowledge for managing the case better. In conclusion, I believe that the interest for the future strategies in probation must be focused on developing a methodology for working with this kind of offenders so that their chances of rehabilitation be equal to the others offenders. I hope my contribution will be useful for you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about our probation work, especially with neurodiverse offenders, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.